and those schools are, many of them known as party schools, and to see these kids coming into the front, giving their lives to follow Jesus is really amazing.
There's just been a lot of prayer for this next generation, and the Lord has been using, whether it's COVID or anxiety and mental health, in our day, the state of the world and the culture, that has really been just a seedbed for young people to ask questions of, is God real and why does he matter? And I think most poignant would be in September this year with Charlie Kirk's death. I mean, that was such a catalyst for so many young people to ask the questions of faith and spirituality and Bible.
On today's episode of the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast, I have with me Ty Lamb. How are you doing, Ty?
Greetings, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Well, as the executive director for the Collegiate Day of Prayer, I would love to just hear your perspective of what God is doing on the college campus.
Yeah, we're living in some special times right now. We're really seeing just the Lord move powerfully amongst Gen Z, especially young men on college campuses. It really has been such a, the past 5 years, especially 3, we've seen just this dramatic shift that whether it's Barna or Pew, just what they're seeing amongst Gen Z in terms of spiritual hunger, curiosity, and engagement has been really just an answer to prayer. I mean, we've been blown away.
I love it. Well, and I'd love to hear. I mean, you're obviously on the campuses. You've got lots of leaders on the campuses. What do they suggest are the reasons for this?
Yeah, I mean, depending on who you ask, there's many perspectives. But I would say that it's nothing short of really a God story. When you look at, Barna came out with the State of the Church in 2025, I think in May, and they're so good and diligent at just cataloging, capturing just the pulse of the church. And they looked at 30 years of data. And when they charted the response to the gospel and spiritual engagement, what they saw from 2000 to about 2021 has been just kind of the slow decline of the church in the United States and really in the West. But something dramatic happened in about 21, 22, where kind of the rate of decline bottomed out. And in 23, 4, and 5, there's been just this, statistical shift where there has been, when people are answering the polling questions, they're saying, a relationship with God, knowing God, learning about God in the Bible is something that they're responding to affirmatively. And so I think the best guesstimate that we have is really that there's just been a lot of prayer for this next generation. And the Lord has been using, whether it's COVID or, anxiety and mental health, in our day, just the state of the world and the culture, that has really been just a seedbed for young people to ask questions of, is God real and why does he matter? And I think most poignant would be in September this year with Charlie Kirk's death. I mean, that was such a catalyst for so many young people to ask the questions of faith and spirituality and Bible. I think Bible sales in September were 2.4 million, which was, I think, double what it was the year prior. I mean, just everything with Bible sales is pretty profound too. I think there's been about a 50% increase in Bible sales over the past 5 years. I think 2019 Bible sales were about 9.7, about 10 million. And in 2024, the year ended with 15 million in Bible sales.
Wow.
And the publishers would account that most of those that are purchasing paper Bibles are young men, first-time Bible engagement.
Wow. That's really extraordinary. I'd love to hear some examples of, stories of young people that have
Yeah.
found faith or moved towards faith. We like to consider this case studies of hope for your commute. So give
Amen.
us a few Holy Ghost stories of ways God is at work.
Yeah. I think, one story that's been pretty impactful for Gen Z that really a story of a college campus is really the campus of Asbury University. And that was in the spring of 2023, and it really was the story of students that were at a chapel service, and the chapel concludes and students linger, and the chapel was a very ordinary chapel. The chapel speaker would say that it was very uneventful, and just a handful of students lingered in worship afterwards, and just the Lord started moving on their hearts to both repent before the Lord, confess sin to their friends, get prayer, and just in humility, return to the Lord in the place of confession and repentance and worship. And it just started this move of God on that campus, where over the course of 2 weeks, so many students both encountered Jesus, responded in humility, and about 50,000 students, not just students, but students and believers, came to Asbury over 2 weeks. Thousands of testimonies of both salvation and deliverance from sin and healing from a physical ailment, and the testimony that went across the globe. I think there were some, like billions of views online, and I think the coolest part about Asbury was that it was the first time for Gen Z that they witnessed a move of God. What they've only heard about as revival in church history, they got to see, some in person, but most online, of the Lord that saves and the Lord that heals and the Lord that delivers. And that really has been a catalyst for so many things that have happened on college campuses the past 3 years. There's been, the fall after Asbury, there was this mom, her name is Tanya Pruitt, and the Lord gave her a dream of gathering students in the basketball arena of Auburn University. Her husband was a basketball coach, one of the basketball coaches at Auburn, and so she went to the athletic director, the university president, and said, "Hey, can we use the basketball arena for one night for an evening of worship and the proclamation of the gospel?" And so she went to all the, she got permission, went to all the sororities, met with a bunch of students, and just mobilized and invited students from across the campus, and gathered some about 5,000 students in the basketball arena. They had a worship night, the gospel was preached, and about 300 students responded to the gospel. It was, beyond what she could have imagined. And then one girl said, "Can I get baptized?" And so a few hundred students hike across the campus of Auburn to this pond on campus, and by a phone light, she got baptized, and her one baptism led to 200 other students who wanted to get baptized. And so for 2 hours, at 10 p.m. at night, in the dark, by phone light, 200 students get baptized, which has led to, about 20 other campus gatherings over the past 2 school years. And I think they've gathered, my numbers are a little dated, I think they've gathered over 120,000 students, across 20 some odd campuses. They've had over 15,000 salvations and over 8,000 baptisms in the course of 2 school years. And this is one ministry movement. And so it's been astounding, to say the least, the past 3 years.
Yeah. Well, and those schools are, many of them known as party schools, and to see these kids coming into the front, giving their lives to follow Jesus is really amazing. Well, talk a little bit about the Collegiate Day of Prayer. The website is collegiatedayofprayer.org. I'd love to hear kind of the history behind it, how you've become the executive director, and even kind of the hopes for the future.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, it dates back about 200 years. It dates back to the early 1800s, and maybe even before that, where in the late 1790s there was a move of God on college campuses called the Second Great Awakening, and this move of God that lasted a few decades was just so transformative, both for college campuses in America, but really the church in America at large, and this move of God in the 1790s and early 1800s really led to this movement of prayer amongst the parents and the saints of that day, where their prayer was, Father, as you moved amongst the students in the 1790s and the 1800s, would you do it again in the 1810s? And so it was just this cry of moms, dads, churchgoers, that as God had moved before, that he would do it again in the current generation. And so by 1815, it kicked off with a number of campuses, a number of churches. And then by 1823, every major denomination of that day and every college campus in America of that day set aside the last Thursday of February as a national concert of prayer for college campuses. Because kind of in that time span, every last Thursday was an opportunity and a time where different churches in different cities and different campuses would just set aside that last Thursday to pray for students. And as more and more believers came around this monthly concert of prayer for college students, it just developed momentum where across America they wanted to have a national day of prayer, a national moment where the church would turn their hearts to the next generation. Well, this goes on for 100 years. It goes on between 1823 and about World War One, and in that span of 100 years, there's about 30 seasons of revival. Strangely,
Wow.
and strange and powerful. Most of these revivals were at the end of February, early March, very much in tandem with the prayers of the saints. And so, 100 years of prayer goes by. World War One happens, and a lot changes in America, and this rhythm of prayer gets lost and forgotten, over the next century. And so, in 2009, a number of collegiate ministry friends were together in New York, and one of our buddies, who was a revival historian, a church historian, he said, "Hey, have you guys heard of this historic day of prayer, historic concert of prayer for colleges?" And none of us had heard of it before. And so he goes on and tell us the history a lot better than I'm doing here, but it just captured our imagination. I mean, we had never heard about it, and I mean, we all were stirred with faith, with the question of, well, if God did it then, what hinders us from doing it again now? And so in 2010, just a group of 10 of us, just mobilized within our spheres of influence and really just invited students and campuses and those that cared about campuses to adopt campuses in prayer. And so year one, we had about 450 campuses adopted in prayer. Year two, 2011, we had 900. Year three, 1,200. Year four, we kind of grew by 300 every year. And by 2014, we had over 1,000 different prayer gatherings in all 50 states, praying for about half the college campuses in America.
Wow.
And then you fast forward another 5 years, by 2019, we had, that was the first year where we saw every campus in America adopted in prayer and prayed for by name. And then you fast forward to 2023, which we talked about earlier, it was Asbury. We had planned to be at Asbury, for about a year. And then, 2 weeks before Collegiate Day of Prayer, in 2023, the revival breaks out.
Yeah.
And we're astounded, blown away, just undone, not totally knowing what to do. As we're seeing videos and posts and reels of students posting about just this, revival that turns into this day and night, worship and prayer, students just lingering God's presence and just crying out for their generation. And so we ended up from there, it was the 200-year anniversary of Collegiate Day of Prayer too, was Asbury.
Wow.
And we were in a
That's
40-day
incredible.
season of fasting as well. And so it was
Wow.
just a wild season. And that season profoundly changed us, for sure.
Oh, my goodness. Well, and I'd love for the pastors, church leaders, staff that are listening, what are ways that we can get involved? There is adopting a school, there's the fast. Maybe talk a little bit about how can we help?
Yeah, no, thanks so much for asking. I think when we started this journey with Collegiate Day of Prayer, we started with the zeal and the ambition to mobilize students in prayer, and we're so grateful, to see students, campus ministries, college ministries really get engaged with God's heart for their campus. But we're convinced that what we desperately need is not just students praying for their campus, but really the church praying for the next generation. I think that we're in the first fruits and the days of early fire of what we've been believing for as revival and spiritual awakening in Gen Z. And in America, there's about 4,200 college campuses. It's about 20 million students in the U.S. On 4,200 campuses, and then globally, there's about 250 million students on about 30,000 college campuses.
Wow.
And our dream is, what could it look like if every college campus in America and every college campus globally had a handful of local churches, 1, 3, 5, 15, that committed that we want to adopt this college campus that's down the street from us, this school that we drive by day in, day out, this school that we see. We don't have any of those students in our church. We don't necessarily have a collegiate ministry, but we would love to have impact there. And our invitation is, what would it look like if down the street from these campuses there was a local congregation that said, we are committed to praying for that campus, that will be our missional expression to 30,000 students that are down the street from us. We're committed to pray once a month, to pray for that church, or to go prayer walk, to pray for that campus, to go prayer walk that campus, and then see what God might do. And our dream is that, in every college town, across America and beyond, there would be an army of 60-year-olds that are praying, Father, as you did before, in previous generations, would you do it again? At the college campus down the street from me, the community college, the private liberal arts school, and that we would have just, this army of seasoned saints, mothers and fathers, that would be contending and interceding for the breakthrough of the gospel, the breakthrough of the Spirit on these campuses. And so I think, the short answer is, we would love for churches to turn their hearts, kind of in the spirit of Malachi 4. What would happen if fathers and mothers turn their hearts, sons and daughters, in prayer? And then from there, our question is, what could God do as the church is praying for the next generation, and how might the gospel go forth, students be encountered? Because I think that as much as God's moving in this generation, the need is great for mothers and fathers to be engaged in both prayer and mission and discipleship to the next generation.
Wow. I love that. We're going to make sure everybody who receives our email newsletter gets access to the prayer guide for 2026. Excuse me. If you are not receiving our email newsletter, be sure to sign up at innovativechurchleaders.org. Click on Join Us. Would you talk a little bit, Ty, about revival is family? I know that's maybe another way to frame what you're doing with the college students versus what you communicate to churches, but talk a little bit about the origins of that foundation.
Yeah. Thanks, Eric. Revival is Family Foundation really is our student-facing ministry, and the name is a little bit unusual because it's a sentence, but it really was something the Lord spoke to us about 10 years ago. And it was this phrase, revival is family. And probably the best way to explain it would be, if salvation is personal, if the response to the gospel is us intentionally pursuing the Lord and something that we must do for ourselves, the certain realities of the kingdom you can only experience, by personal choice. There are certain expressions of the kingdom that you can only experience in the family of God, and specifically being revival. That revival is not something that you just experience you personally with Jesus, but it's something that we as a family of God both enter into in prayer and believe God for the breakthrough that He, like Acts 1, was a story of the disciples, hearing just the call of Jesus to the upper room, that they would be this upper room praying family that would be contending for the promises of God for their generation. And that it really was in the context of this upper room praying family that Acts 2 revival and spiritual awakening get birthed. And so revival as family really is an invitation to the next generation to get God's heart for their campus, for their generation, and that they would, amongst their peers, gather in united prayer for the breakthrough of the Spirit and the gospel in their day. And so our heart is to help equip college students to be praying leaders and lifelong disciples. And our hope is, our ambition is to see every college student awaken to Jesus, which we cannot do by just sheer ministry and labor, but we're believing that the Lord desires 20 million college students, and we're praying that the Lord would awaken 20 million college students to know who Jesus is.
I love it. Well, I'd love one last question, if you would, for those pastors who have a heart for college students, would love to see more college students as part of their church, whether they're in a college town or just, a place where kids grow up and leave the church at high school. Some are leaving at middle school nowadays. But I would love to hear maybe a story or two of how you've seen churches really engage well with young adults that age.
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Two stories I can share that are of recent history. One of them was from Waco, Texas. And it really is a story of about 40 churches that surround the campus of Baylor. And it was three pastors who really just got stirred to really bring the churches of a city together. And their ambition was, what would happen if the churches of Waco came together in common faith to believe God for the students of Baylor and really, the students of their region. And so what kind of ensued was the launching of Last Thursday Prayer in Waco. And so every month, a different church would host a citywide prayer meeting. It'd be a 6:30 a.m. prayer meeting. And they would invite, saints from churches across the city, as well as students from the campus who wanted to come out and pray. And what happened was, it started out with, 100, 200, but on many Last Thursdays, it's now 300, 400, 500 students. Students and saints that are coming together in prayer. And it was leading up to the Collegiate Day of Prayer in 2024, but it's been such a catalytic and unifying movement in the city that John Durham, who's the pastor of Highland Baptist Church there, he and a few other pastors, Jimmy Seibert from Antioch and J.P. Pecluda from Harris Creek, they all committed to doing Last Thursday Prayer until Jesus returns, which was a very audacious thing that they set their hearts to. But they've done it the past 2 years. And I mean, month after month, a different church is hosting, and they're bringing the churches together in their city. They're bringing the 60-year-olds praying with the 20-year-olds. And then they're bridging the gap between the church and the city and the campus of the city in prayer and discipleship, because for a lot of these students, they're getting to pray with 60-year-olds that they never have interactions with.
Yeah.
And if the 60-year-olds, they're getting to pray with and pray for the 20-year-olds that they have such a heart for.
Wow, that is amazing.
So that's one story. I'll share one other quick story would be from down the street, College Station. About 5 churches in College Station, they heard about the 40-day season of prayer and fasting that leads up to the Collegiate Day of Prayer. And 5 college ministries that were church-based said, let's mobilize our students to do 40 days of prayer and fasting. And so a number of sizable churches did. About 3,000 students engaged with this 40 days of prayer and fasting. And they were using our 40-day prayer guide that's on YouVersion, the YouVersion Bible app. And so these 3,000 students every day, they were praying privately, fasting, together, and then gathering, like during the week at different times. And the testimonies of these 40 days of prayer and fasting was so revolutionary for these college ministries. Many of them had students that never fasted before. It was their first time fasting. I mean, they experienced the Lord profoundly. I mean, so many of them, just grew in hunger, in faith, and just saw how the Lord transformed their lives in a season of fasting. And their churches were really impacted because all these older saints, especially the 60-year-olds, they're like, oh, the students are fasting. Can we fast too? And so it started this movement of fasting in these churches inadvertently, where 20-year-olds provoked the 60-year-olds to join them in the season of fasting and prayer. And so now they're committing to do it every year, the season of 40 days of prayer, which this next year is going to be January 18th to Collegiate Day of Prayer on February 26th.
That's incredible. Again, check it out at collegiatedayofprayer.org. Ty, thank you for your efforts. We'll pray along with you for God to continue to move. God bless.
God bless. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Innovative Church Leaders Podcast, where we bring you case studies of hope to help you reach new people and make disciples with Spirit-led innovation.